Okay, so we have made one waistcoat, and I think it's time that we make the second one. As with any project where we don't have a pre-existing pattern and we have to figure out a pattern, there is definitely some mocking up to do. In this case, this one is actually mock-up number 2, I think, and unsurprisingly, it also did not work. Especially considering when it comes to making waistcoats, I haven't done that before, and I genuinely have no earthly idea of what I'm doing. I was trying to draft a waistcoat without having any experience in making waistcoats. Unsurprisingly, it did not go very well, and it took quite a few tries before I actually found something that would work. And then it was off to mock-up number 2. This time I tried to use a black snails women's waistcoat in 1890s pattern and silhouette, which is of course problematic considering that this is set during the 1790s and not the 1890s, but it gave me the base for a women's waistcoat that buttoned up straight, which is exactly what I was looking for. This was a very close design. It was very close, but ultimately it also did not work. Okay, so this is just pinned on because I've made approximately 50 million thousand mock-ups of this waistcoat and I still haven't figured it out. But I think we finally figured it out. So again, this is just a paper towel because no. What I did was I went ahead and cut it out and pinned it in place, and I think, my dear friends, I think we have finally figured out that lapel situation. So, for reference, there's the lapel. There's what I have. And I think that's as close as it's going to get. Also, big, huge thank you to Bernadette Banner and her Sherlock Holmes waistcoat video, because that little number right there that she drafted is what I did in order to make this work out. So that way the collar is built into the waistcoat instead of separate like I was originally trying to do. So, and again, I know that's an 1890s waistcoat that she drafted there, and this is probably more, this is the base pattern for this is also 1890s black snails pattern, but you know what, nothing about his waistcoat is accurate in any sense of the word, so we're gonna go with it, and I think that's what we're going to do. Other note is it's not quite long enough, so I'm going to have to extend it maybe another 2 inches or so that the length is at least correct, and maybe shift over the button placement because they're too far over. Other than that, I think we might be onto something, which would be very nice and exciting because I am almost burnt out on this waistcoat. Okay, so I have started mocking up Arno's red waistcoat again. I think I've done this about 4 times, so I'm really hoping this time will work. And I think what I'll do is I will try to make this into a wearable mock-up so that I can be sure that it will, so I could really understand the construction details. And this is what it's looking like so far. So these are the front bodice pieces here, and I went ahead and measured across the waist and across the bust just so I could be sure that it'll actually fit. I suspect there might be extra room in the bust, we'll see. And then of course I've got the back there, so that's what those are. I've marked out the buttons and buttonhole placements, and then the next thing I need to do is actually on the using the pattern piece, I need to go in and see if I can cut out a facing for the lapel and the collar, which will be cut down as one. I hope that collar is long enough around the neck. I think it is. Again, we'll see. This is what a mock-up's for. And then, of course, I also need to figure out the placement of the interfacing. I will not put interfacing on this side, but I will probably interface the whole front part of this. So. And then I promptly realized that this will require a facing. If I'm going to be putting interfacing in this waistcoat, which every waistcoat would require, then I will also need to add in a facing. And a facing is also there for another reason. It's so you can basically turn out the lapels, so your fabric on the interior of the lapel, once it's flipped back, will match the fabric of the waistcoat itself. So for that reason, I just got out my drafting paper, which is just, I think it's an architect's paper, and I just traced out where I thought the facing should go. And I just lined it up to the dart, so wherever that dart seam would be is where I put the end of the facing. So that way I could finish that edge by sewing it onto the dart. Okay, and then I also marked just with little hashed lines, another little spot so that I could cut out the interfacing with this same pattern piece as well. And I just kind of marked inside the seam allowance, I suppose. I'm not entirely sure. Okay, we have some pieces. We have progress. So here are the front facing pieces. I've already got the interfacing pad stitched in, so these lapels really do want to just lay back. You can already see the curve in there where they really want to just kind of flip forward, which is exactly what we want them to do. So now what I need to do is I need to take the facing pieces and basically lay them out over top, stitch them on there, and then flip them around. And then that will cover the interfacing and also bind off all of the raw edges along the front of the lapel. I think, let me think. Yeah, so I think I'll leave the top edges raw so that I can hand finish the center seam of the collar. And then once that's done, then I could attach the front panels to the back. And then try it on, I guess, for fitting before I apply any of the buttons or buttonholes. I think that is the order of events, so we'll keep going. This is not worn over a pair of stays. This is just to kind of give an indication of how it fits. And the back is gathering up a bit there, so I think what I will do is I will go ahead and add in the darts just for shaping, which is what they're intended for. We do have some issues with the collar where it sits out and it's a little bit wider than I would like to be, right there. It's quite roomy around the neck. And I think that's where some padding probably would have been useful, because that would actually just fill out that space, which wasn't uncommon in Victorian dressmaking. They did pad a lot of their garments. And then this is where I finally move on to making the actual waistcoat, and I did decide to interface this with some horsehair canvas that I have, and I think this project actually used up the remainder of my horsehair canvas, so if I do any more tailoring in the future, I will have to buy some more. And as a testament to just how little I had left of this horsehair canvas, I did actually have to piece it, which I think is fine because I kept it on the same grain. But yeah, I did have to piece this in two areas on the other on the other panel of the canvas. Okay, so it is midnight and I am determined that this pattern will be cut out tonight. This is the linen that I'll be using. There's the mock-up over there. So all I need to do is just get over myself and cut it out. So I'm going to do that right now. Right now. Right now. So now that I had some pattern pieces, that I could mostly trust, I went ahead and laid them out, and I tried to mimic the grain lines that were on the Black Snails pattern because I knew they would be mostly correct. This would keep the body of the vest on the straighter grain while having the collar that's made into the vest on the bias, so it would curve better around the neck. I think that's correct, but that's how I chose to do it, and so far so good. So I just got back from a little day trip, and while I was in the car, I managed to get some sewing done. So I did the front 2 darts on the waistcoat, as well as the back 2 darts on the waistcoat, and half of the pad stitching. So I just have the other lapel to do, and then I can attach the facings and then sew together the back panels and then attach the side panels to the back panels, and yeah, closures and lining, and then I think I'll be done. So honestly, I could probably, if I really actually hustle like I usually don't, then I could probably get this done within the next couple days. So it's just been sitting in a cut up pile pretty much for 2 weeks. But yes, very excited. Almost there. And then it was on to more pad stitching. The pad stitching for this was done with a very, very fine matching cotton thread. And this cotton actually matched the fabric pretty much exactly. So it's almost invisible on the other side. And I actually did do this when I did this, I did slightly shape the lapels to kind of encourage them to fold back into the shape that I wanted them to fold into. And that is the magic of collars and lapels. And once our lapels interfacing was safely sewn into place, I went ahead and attached the facings, and I backstitched all along the edges of the facing and the waistcoat. Now on the facing for the waistcoat, I very unwisely did not leave enough room for me to turn under and fell the raw edge where it meets the dart. So what I did was I just cut a, I think it was 1.5 inch wide strip of the same fabric that I used for the waistcoat. And then I basically folded it into a bias strip, but it's not actually bias cut, it was cut on the straight ring. But I folded under each edge so I could just lay it on top of the raw edge of the facing and then just stitch that over the raw edge to encase it.
Hurry up, we'll leave it. CT-1284, Spark, reporting for duty, sir.
Spark.
Lost one of our starting lineup, kid. You ready to step up and take his place? Yes, sir. Just show me my station. You be
They missed us. They don't know we're here. They're heading for Payable Gun and the command center. They're going to bomb it.
Sir, we have incoming bombers.
Okay, so it is 3 a.m. and bedtime, but this is what I've accomplished today. I have the one of 2 front panels almost done. It has the pad stitching, the interfacing pad stitched in place, and then the facing has also been stitched on and flipped around, so it's fully encasing the interfacing. And then Arno's does have some top stitching around the edges, if that's visible. I think it is. So I went ahead and did that for the top lapel, but I haven't gotten to the bottom one. It still likes to bow out a bit. I don't know how to get it narrower and straighter, so this is just what we have. And I also just went ahead and took a dart straight in because there is a seam there, which makes me think maybe the collar was attached separately, but also I don't know how to do that, so I can't be bothered. So that's that, and I think I'll also cut maybe some bias to encase that raw seam there. The other lapel is pinned and ready to be attached to the facing, and then the back is completely done and ready to be attached to the front 2 panels. This is where I cut the bias tape, I guess, except it's not on the bias, so I guess just some double fold tape to encase the raw seam on the center back. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it until tomorrow. And tomorrow will hopefully be finishing both the lapels, attaching them to the center back, and then maybe we'll get around to the 12 zillion buttons that are going to be on this thing. And buttons are these, and I have 12 of them, and I hope 12 will be enough because they are a million tiny buttons closing this thing. So, tiny buttons to go with some tiny buttonholes, which will be installed tomorrow. Yeah. Now that our facings are attached and everything is pad stitched in place and everything is top stitched where it should be, I went ahead and attached the front panels of the waistcoat to the back with a strong, tiny little back stitch in the same red thread. Okay. That's mostly pinned to the way it'll actually fit now. And as you can see, we got some issues around the bust area because it is too big. And the reason for that, the base pattern for this waistcoat is 1890s, and as we know, 1890s ladies were shaped quite differently. The silhouette was different. It was more of a pigeon breast. It was rounded in the front, whereas with the 1790s and the 1780s and the Enlightenment period, stays were very kind of tubular, very straight, and there was not a lot of extra floof going on up here to cause that almost pigeon breast. I don't think we're quite there yet in the 1890s, but almost. And that's why there is so much extra room here, like right here, as you can see. So the way we're gonna fix that is one of two things. we're either going to extend the darts that are here, that end about here, and we will either carry them up, or, which I think I'll do instead, is I'll take those darts and I will turn them into princess seams. So all of this will kind of get folded into a princess seam, which will both take out the excess shape and really make it fit better to the stays silhouette that I've got going on right now. That is the plan. That is a lot of work because I kind of finished the inside a little bit. So we'll see how much deconstruction I'm willing to put myself through. So here, what you see me doing is actually turning under the raw edge of the shoulders, but ultimately what I ended up doing to adjust the fit for this waistcoat was I did take the darts up further. And this really helped with the bust issue where it was just too big in the bust. And then for the shoulder seam raw edge, I suppose, I just turned it over twice in the narrowest little hem that I could manage. Right there at the shoulder, you could also see just above my hand, you could see where I tucked it in a bit, and that was a small dart that I took basically right at the shoulder seam to adjust the fit over the bust as well, since it was still gaping, it was still a little bit too big. So just tucking that under just the tiniest bit and then sewing it down on either side, that just helped with fit there. Fortunately, the collar does cover most of that. And then rolling over the raw edge of each shoulder as well, that really helped with taking in that shoulder seam a bit as well, since I had a little bit more room than I wanted. The shoulders were sewn down, the shoulder seam was sewed down with the tiniest of tiny little filling stitches. Now for the front of the waistcoat, I had this small problem of it liking to wrinkle a bit when I wear it, and this won't be a problem when it's worn over stays. However, I don't want to wear it only over stays. So in order to combat this kind of wrinkling effect that it has, I went ahead and added some boning, and to encase the boning, I just grabbed some grosgrain ribbon that I'm pretty sure came off of a Godiva box, and sewed that over the darts, and the dart is where I was going to encase the boning. And the boning in question were some heavy-duty zip ties that I purchased at Lowe's and just cut down to size. And now we can move on to the approximately 15,000 buttons and buttonholes I had to sew on. So for the buttons, I went ahead and marked them in Sharpie, the exact length and width apart that I wanted the buttonholes to be. This way I could just cut along that line and then sew a simple buttonhole stitch around the cut that I would make. I did this with the doubled up thread because it was such a fine thread and I really couldn't get a, they do take a lot of wear and tear, buttonholes. So I did double up the thread, but I didn't want to switch to a different thread only because I didn't want to purchase another one when I still had so much left of this one, and this one really was the perfect color. It matched the fabric almost precisely. So for that reason, I just doubled it up and sewed on the buttonhole stitch. And apologies, I did not actually get any footage of sewing on the actual buttons, but they are shank buttons, so that kind of goes without saying how to sew them on. The entire waistcoat I did decide to sew by hand because even though nothing about the waistcoat is historically accurate in any way, It is not a 1790s men's waistcoat. I wanted at least the thought to be there, the inspiration of the period to be there. So for that reason, I did decide to use as much as I could afford the right kind of fibers and at least the technique of sewing it by hand, because as we know, sewing machines weren't exactly a thing. They were real, they existed in the time, but they were not commonplace. So that's why I decided to sew it by hand.